We're going to have a wonderful panel with North Carolina advocates. So I'd like to invite you all, our panelists, and Jennifer Berkshire back up to the stage. And while you are coming up, I will introduce our eminent panelists. So thank you. So you know Jennifer from earlier. So here's Letha Muhammad, is the co-executive director. There we go. Just clicked in, I can hear. She is the co-executive director of Education Justice Alliance, based here in Raleigh. She represents EJA by serving as co-chair on the coordinating committee for Every Child NC, a statewide coalition working to ensure equitable funding for North Carolina public schools, and we're also a member of that. There are wonderful members throughout the state. She's also the co-founder for Heal Together North Carolina, a multiracial coalition working to protect and transform North Carolina public schools. Thank you. Welcome, Letha. And we have Marcus Bass here on the end, is the executive director at Advance Carolina. He joined Advance Carolina and the Black Alliance in 2018 after serving as statewide campaign director for voting rights advocacy group Democracy NC. Prior to that, Marcus has worked for the North Carolina Association of Educators, and he was a teacher and coach in Clinton City Schools. Welcome, Marcus. Thank you for being here. Next to Marcus is Todd Warren. He's a public school parent, former teacher, and a past president of the Guilford County Association of Educators. He currently helps lead Down Home North Carolina's statewide campaigns team, and he helped found the Heal Together NC Coalition. So thank you, Todd. And we know Dr. Shanika Moore-Lawrence. I'll just add a few things to your introduction from before. She's been an educator for more than 24 years as high school English teacher, elementary school teacher, literacy teacher, assistant principal, and principal. And she's currently the senior director in Wake County Public Schools, leading a number of programs. And as you heard, she's the proud president of the North Carolina PTA. Thank you all for being here.
So we have an amazing panel, and we could actually just use up all the time having them talk about themselves and their work, but that's not going to happen. So if you've been paying attention this morning, you've probably picked up on the fact that there are some tensions brewing beneath the work that we're all engaged in. One big one would be that, on the one hand, there is unbelievable organizing happening in North Carolina. You see it right here on the stage, and you're all part of it out here in this room. But on the other hand, the hits keep on coming. And I'm not going to say losing, because Letha has banned me from using that word. The other tension is one that our audience member, can you just introduce yourself? You. Me? Yes. Kristen articulated so movingly in the earlier session that we're all here to defend the institution of public education. But as so many of us know, the system, whether it's by design or lethargy or history, is often broken. And so we have to, any conversation we have about organizing and defending public education has to acknowledge that reality too. We've actually assembled the perfect crew of people to address both of those. So Mark, I'm actually going to start with you, because I'm imagining that there are a fair number of people in this room who in the last week or so have been feeling a little beaten down, that things don't feel so good when you look at the North Carolina education politics and policy landscape. And yet you have a surprisingly upbeat take that I think we could really benefit from hearing about.
First of all, you're not eating enough cat and dog. That's the problem. That is the problem. We're gonna fix that. Too early? Okay. First, I want to thank you for having this conversation. Anything Yvonne Brennan does is top tier. And I think we are literally sitting in the McKimmon Center in the middle of your book, right? And I think about, I work a lot in protest culture and protest spaces, right? And I think a lot of people don't understand when we talk about frontline activism, what that is and what that looks like. creating a document that helps dictate or helps illustrate the connection between the devaluing of public education and the intentional dismantling of that system through the political system is exactly the type of manuscript we need in this fight, right? I think the hope that you are mentioning that I like to bring to the space is that even though year after year we're seeing onslaught of attacks in public education, there is more organizing happening on the ground, in community, at every single level than never before. We thought, I think the point of hopelessness was about maybe 4 years ago when Lieutenant Governor Robinson issued an audit of the school system. He literally, over the summer, made the decision to spend countless dollars going through each and every single curriculum guide of teachers, examining he literally sent out a task force to police public education. And now he's going home. And now he's going home. And so I think, and the reason why he's going home is because he picked the wrong fight. Public education is, in some ways, a sleeping giant, but it's still a giant. And I think the number of individuals in rural communities that depend on public education for livelihood, not just the students alone that depend on public education to prepare them for careers, they understand, regardless of Republican or regardless if you're Democrat, regardless if you're Libertarian or Green, public schools in rural North Carolina, public schools in North Carolina in general are here for a very intentional reason. And I think the joy that I see in individuals that are coming into this space as an activist, parents don't really know at all that they're activists. From the very first day you walk in a kindergarten classroom, you're advocating, not just for your student, but for other students. And the beauty of what I get to do and working alongside folks like Todd, working alongside Letha, is activate those individuals and bring them into the movement. Because there are many different streams that bring people into social justice movements, many different streams. And it all doesn't look like being on the front line of a actual protest facing down, law enforcement. It looks like being in this room, getting this information, building commonality, and more I'm seeing these conversations happening and people are taking this information back. So I'm just excited to be here, and that's part of the joy that we like to show people, not the hopelessness, because hopelessness would have kept us in segregated school systems. We wouldn't have gotten this far if there wasn't hope in the process, and we like to identify that as well.
That was amazing. What a way to start things off. And Todd, I want to turn to you because I think it's so easy to look at the what's happening politically in North Carolina and think, oh, they have all the power. But you look at the landscape and you actually see some weaknesses.
Okay. Is that all right?
Want to use this?
Yeah, let's try. It's so good to see so many of you, and Jennifer, I feel like I'm on stage with one of my heroes. You make us all smarter, like seriously. But yeah, in preparation for this panel, we were talking just a little bit about the history, and Tyler mentioned that, with Moral Mondays, the history for public ed and the fight for public ed in North Carolina is long. But if you were here in 2013, you remember the kind of like the shock and awe of the North Carolina legislature that when they came in. During that time period, they had a Republican trifecta, and really anything they wanted to do, they could get done. And, we're passing bills at midnight that had not been read by Democrats, just really bad stuff. Women's rights, immigrant rights, public ed, everything for all public good was on the chopping block. In 2018, we broke the Republican supermajority. And a lot of that crazy stuff stopped. It wasn't like everything got fixed overnight, but the really bad, crazy bills stopped almost immediately. We're still in this back and forth fight, and it is no mystery, I think, to most of us in this room, that the same legislature that was found to have racially gerrymandered the districts is still back at it again, trying to push some very unpopular bills. But they are having, I think the good news for us, for those of us that have been in this fight for a long time, they are having a harder and harder time because it is very intensely unpopular. And we saw that with the fight for Medicaid, to get 600, what it should have just been an easy thing for North Carolina to reach out and do, to get 600,000 people health care, which they now have because we stayed in that fight. They could no longer hold that line. It was unpopular to keep over 500,000 people without health care in North Carolina. It was deeply unpopular. They fought with themselves last year over casinos and almost and could not pass a budget because of it, right? This year, yes, last week we saw, or a couple weeks ago, we saw them pass another voucher expansion. There's a reason that did not happen in the spring. There is nobody running for office right now that wanted to come back to Raleigh to take a vote in the middle of election season, to come off the campaign trail to take a vote on something deeply unpopular. The reason that they're back is because they are afraid they're going to lose. Okay? So those of us that have been in the fight for a long time, I know we're tired, but we're on to them. And they know that they are on borrowed time. And we can roll this back. And the rural Republicans did not want this to move forward. And so we can become an Idaho and we can become a Texas where we beat this by bridging the gap between urban and rural and not letting them play these cultural war games. So I think we're starting to see the tide start to shift in North Carolina. We just got to hold on a little bit longer.
Thank you. That was amazing. We're all sitting up just a little straighter in our seats after hearing that. Shanique, I want to turn to you because Marcus was talking a little bit about sort of the power of advocacy, and that's who you are. And when we met a few weeks ago, I was really impressed at what a broad understanding you have of what it means to be an advocate.
So shout out to my PTA friends that are in the audience. I think oftentimes, and my colleague at the end said something about the sleeping giant. When I began my term as NCPTA president, I expressed to our board that NCPTA is a sleeping giant. And our PTAs in the 800 units across the 100 counties in North Carolina have such a powerful job of advocacy. And it's not just advocating for your own child, it's advocating for the children who don't have an advocate at the table and raising those voices. And oftentimes we as PTA contributors and advocates, we're advocating for our individual schools, but now is the time in the season to be advocating for the North Carolina public school good. And so I'm very proud of efforts that we've been seeing both in our rural PTAs and also in our urban PTAs to, like you said, bridge the gap and know that we in the urban areas need to be partnering with our rural advocates of PTA to make sure that the voices of parents, families, guardians, caretakers are loud. And don't ever let anyone tell you that the parent voice doesn't matter, because it does, because we have implemented things like email campaigns and gone to Raleigh, gone to DC, and we've seen both at the North Carolina PTA level and also at National PTA that advocacy matters, and our parents are some of the strongest voices we have.
Thank you. That's so good to hear. All right, Letha, it's your turn. Letha is in the book, and she has a quote that I refer to constantly, and it's basically to say that defending public education is not the same as defending the status quo. We need you to help us understand what that means, but also what it looks like when you're talking to folks on the ground.
Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for the invitation to be here and to lend my voice to this conversation. I don't start any kind of panel without rooting me and who I am and helping you all understand who I am, because in that understanding helps you know why I'm here. So I'm a Black mama, first and foremost, of 3 proud public school graduates. I can say 3 now because the youngest graduated last December. But that experience actually led me to this space, right? And led me to that quote, right? The understanding that to defend public schools is not enough. We have to defend and transform. And I say that from my own experience as a Black mother whose first child, who's now 25, entered Wake County Public Schools in first grade at Weatherstone Elementary. And I immediately saw, because I was on the PTA, very involved, very engaged, that kids that looked like my daughter was not getting what they needed and deserved within that public school. And it lit a fire in me as a parent to not just view this problem from an individual, I need to protect my child. I understood that I needed to protect all children and that I needed to help shift a system that I believe wholeheartedly in, that my tax dollars goes to support. I needed to help transform that system. So this transformation work that have been doing for over 10 years, but it started from my real life lived experience. And so when I think about the fight to protect public education, I always have to think about the working class Black and Latinx families I get the pleasure of working with, who sit at the intersection of criminalization, of push out, of being pushed into the school to prison pipeline and the school to deportation pipeline. And unfortunately, it happens in our schools. That push out, that push into those systems or pipelines happens in our public institutions. So when we think about what's under attack, we cannot just defend. We have to be critical of where that system needs to transform so that we can bring all parents along. Because this fight is a fight for all of us. It's not an individual fight. It's not for affluent or middle-class white families. It's not for affluent or middle-class Black families. It is for all families. And when we create an environment in our public schools that helps the children at the margins, the children who are most directly impacted by the inequities that we know show up in public schools, we actually make our public schools better for all of us, right? And so I'm always here to beat that drum. When Todd and I had the crazy idea, and we're gonna blame Todd, he thought of it first, for us to launch Heal Together North Carolina, we knew, and it was predicated, right, that we wanted to bring together a multiracial group of folks, right, who we knew cared about public education. But we would have these conversations, Todd and I, 9 a.m. on Thursdays, we still do this, where we would talk about what's working, but what isn't working, and how do we get the message out to folks like you all that may not have the same lived experiences as the families that I get the privilege to work with on a regular basis. And how do we bring us all into the realization that our schools deserve to be transformed, because we all deserve for that public good to be the best that it can be.
Well, I think we can probably just wrap up now after that. And Letha, I'm going to ask you to elaborate on that. But Marcus, I want to go back to you because I mentioned some of the tensions that are sort of underneath this work. And there's one more that I think you sort of touched on. And we heard earlier from our rural educator. And that on the one hand, education is this kind of sleeping giant, right? That it has the potential to activate all sorts of people.
That's right.
And yet it's not necessarily, or at least it historically hasn't been an issue that people necessarily vote in response to. I'm really curious from your vantage point, whether you see education as playing a bigger role in this coming election cycle.
Education already plays a massive role. I want us to think back 4 years ago, and I see there are a few, or any school board members here. I see a few over here in the back. Let's give them a round of applause, you all. We're just getting in the game. When I say we, I mean like the broader we of like good people, not trying to stay as nonpartisan as possible. I already messed up the first time. In reality, though, there has been a concerted effort by the right to use public schools as a pathway to political power, right? In the midst of the pandemic, you can ask those folks back there in the back how terrible and how horrible school board meetings gotten. Public comment was one of the nasty, it was worse than Jerry Springer. And it happened across the state. And from the outside looking in, the general public just saw passionate parents. Now we see how organized they were. And we see the intentionality of individuals. How many people remember Betsy DeVos? All right. Betsy DeVos made a leapfrog from North Carolina as the leader of our school system to the United States government under the previous administration. And as soon as she left, it was a hurricane of vitriol in our school districts. They planted a seed. They invested in finding individuals that could run for school board. They decided to take over those school boards. And at the same time, they're divesting in public education. So they were trying to, they put two holes in the bucket. And I think in a very real way, we're just now stopping one, right? I think folks are realizing now that what they saw in the school board meetings around mask mandates and the removal of masks, around book bans, that was fueling the fire for the right for the fight ahead. That wasn't just about what was happening in the schools. That was setting up a transgender ban in sports. That was setting up them going back into, they have spent 12 years in our bathrooms. Y'all realize that, right? They have spent 12 years worried about what's happening in our bathrooms. But they're not even vetting the folks that they're putting up to run for office and what bathrooms they're in. And so in a very real way, I think, and I'm glad Letha said, I got one, but I'm glad Letha said that this, and it's very true, this is not about white or black, it's white and black, it's rich and poor, and it's not Republican versus Democrat, it is future focused. And I think that is a very real thing. But the concerted effort that we've seen at the local level to build power, to dismantle local school boards of education. And anybody here from Wilmington, North Carolina? In Wilmington, North Carolina, the Republican Party sent out a mandate for them to fire the superintendent in New Hanover County. And guess what happened? The superintendent got fired. There are situations happening like that across North Carolina where our public schools have been taken hostage. And I think in a very real way, we're just not waking up and seeing that. And in the same way, the courts are being taken hostage. Right, and so when you look at this, when you really start examining what is happening, it's a lot more than just a couple of moms coming together because they don't want masks. You know, these individuals are being in spaces like this, probably in the McKimmon Center, let's be real. And in a very real way, we have to make sure that they understand, because parents, they just want to advocate. But we have to show them that there are other on-ramps to advocacy like this space, because I do believe that the majority of parents that were going to those book ban meetings at the school board and telling folks to, take the masks off and talking about Jesus but not living Jesus, I think those people, if they had another opportunity to see advocates in this space here, I think they would shift their focus to this greater picture. And I think that's the hope. But it's been very nasty. And I'm very thankful for our school board leaders, because you cannot imagine what it looks like being the only woman on a majority male school board in a rural part of the state, the only African American or the only Latinx person, the only Asian American person. And you have to advocate for every student, not just the students that look like a background that you represent. So that line of attack and that very intentional focus on public schools is really how they have launched a war up until this week.
Todd, could I ask you to stand up and model your shirt? Yes. So you just... You heard You heard Marcus describe very eloquently a systematic effort to use school boards and the politics around school boards to build power on the right. You and Letha and really everyone on the stage is part of an ambitious effort to do something very different. And I wondered if you could just talk a little bit about Public School Strong, the larger project, but how you see it fitting into this landscape that Marcus just did such a great job helping us understand.
Yeah, sure. The Heal Together Coalition, which we at Down Home, North Carolina, we do rural organizing and anchor with Education Justice Alliance and the Center for Racial Equity and Education. When we formed that coalition, all of us have been enmeshed in the education justice landscape in North Carolina for well over a decade. Some of us for 20 years. We don't need just another group. We're specifically working on turning out and talking to new people and building skills in places that we have not gotten to in North Carolina, and then to work to unite and build skills and build teams on the ground so that we build muscle over time. And literally, the Public School Strong mobilization was just that, a mobilization, because we saw people like the Proud Boys, like Moms for Liberty, turning up at school board meetings, and it was just a response to say, we don't think that represents the people of North Carolina. And we need people that think like us that may have been turned away either during the pandemic or when they saw what was going on at the school board meetings, they said, ooh, no, I don't think I want to do that. We just simply invited them to come to a training, talk to them about where to find their school board meeting, what they could expect to go on, and get a shirt and show up, so that people like I'm Natalie, I'm thrilled to see you here today, and Marcus shouting out the other school board members, Tyler and Christine and other folks that have been on school boards that are feeling really embattled. We were hearing from school board members across North Carolina who were just like, I don't know if I can do this anymore. It's just gotten so hateful and so vitriolic, and it is just not what I signed up to do. These are people that are not aspiring to higher political office. That's right. They're good, decent public servants. Lynn, people that have really put in a lot of work and time and taken time away from their families to make sure our kids get what they need. And so Public School Strong was literally just starting to make sure people show up and let them know, like, we see you, and we are the majority. We want fully funded, honest, accurate, safe public schools for all children, regardless of zip code. And the effort has grown to right now we have chapters in over 70 of 100 North Carolina counties. And we have changed the narrative on what the fight for public schools is in North Carolina. 2 years ago, the headlines were filled with stuff from Moms for Liberty. Like from the coast to the mountains to the coast, like it was bad news in terms of like what they were sucking the oxygen out of the room. Public School Strong is really just like, all it is people just like you showing up at their school board meetings and demanding full funding for public schools and saying, the privatization movement and other things that are taking away core services for our kids, we see you and we're not going to stand for it. And we know that public schools, the promise of public schools, the liberatory promise of public schools, that has not yet to be realized, that we're here for it, and we're building that movement. So it is nothing more than really just like putting on a jersey for our team, because we saw the other team like had they were very small, but they were very loud. So we needed to make sure our voice got amplified.
And it's so exciting to see Public School Strong started here in North Carolina, and it really is taking off. So when I go to Iowa the week after next, it's part of a Public School Strong project in Iowa. And I think, it's so exciting to hear that this kind of organizing is happening. But Shanique, I know, at a certain point, it really requires talking to individual parents. And we're all aware that, it's one thing to be like passionate on behalf of defending public schools and the idea of a public good. But once it gets down to the individual conversations with parents, I wonder if you have any advice for us about how to have those conversations and what to do when it starts to get complicated.
Yes. While we as PTAs and advocates in schools have been known to be the Moms Club, the fundraising mechanism and vehicle in schools, we have to quickly change that narrative. Because if we continue to live in that space, we are going to continue to not be seen as important contributors to this narrative. So I advise our PTA leaders that are in this space, PTA leaders that may see this later, to really make sure that you have advocacy goals and priorities around protecting, supporting, and advancing public education. Because until we do that, then our voice can be seen, oh, that's just that mom group over there. Those are just those, historically, majority white moms, stay-at-home moms. But we have to change that. We have to, of course, support our schools all we can with fundraising efforts, but we have to do twice or even triple the amount of effort and time in regards to making sure that we're advocating for public education. And I say that when you're talking to families, it's not just about talking to families that look like you, families that are in your social group or your network. It's about stepping outside the aisle. When we do some research and collect some data about why families do not get engaged in the work of PTAs, it's because they weren't asked. It's because they didn't see their families being represented by the work that was being done. And so my ask and challenge is that in order to diversify, we have to do that more than just by talking diversification. We have to actually put in intentional steps and measures to make sure that your PTA boards represent your school culture and community, both linguistically, ethnically, culturally, but also making sure that you have asked your families what they need, what they want, and what role they can contribute. Oftentimes when we see our Black and brown families entering school buildings, they sometimes are measured with a deficit measuring stick. And until we remove and break that deficit measuring stick, then we're going to continue to see those families not be engaged in the advocacy work of organizations like PTA.
Letha, we're now firmly in your territory. And one thing, you told me an amazing story about how you've been basically doing just this in real life, bringing together groups of parents who on the surface would seem to have very little in common. And I'm thinking about affluent white parents who might have children with disabilities, and African American and other parents who are really concerned about the excessive discipline and policing in the schools. I thought that was such an amazing example of how to do the hard work that Shanique was just telling us about. Bring that to life for us. What does that look like?
Jennifer with the hard questions. I love it. I think it's creating spaces for us to come together first and foremost and share our experiences. So to Shaniqua's point, right? It's about when we only create space for one narrative, one experience, one type of family, there's a missed opportunity to see where the commonality really shows up. And so for my organization, our work is really predicated on dismantling the school to prison pipeline and school to deportation pipeline, ending the criminalization of Black, brown, students with disabilities, students who identify as LGBTQ+. And the reason we're clear about these student groups is that when we look at the data of who is excessively suspended, referred to law enforcement in schools, are pushed out, it is this category of parent. And when we think about students who identify as LGBTQ+, or who have a diagnosed or undiagnosed disability, who have an IEP, and they're entering, are being suspended, it isn't about necessarily the color of your skin, the amount of resources or money that's available, we find that there's this through line, right, that connects all. And so we try, and in particular, in our Public Schools Strong campaign, it's like to surface up that these issues are a connector for all of us, and there's a way for us to come together and think about what's working well for public schools, but then what isn't working well, and how do we build a base of folks who can actually work to transform it. And I really appreciated Kristen, right? Yeah. Earlier, like, those tears were my tears. It's tears that I cry on a regular basis, because when you sit at the intersection of protecting this thing that you know we need in our society, but then you're having meetings on a regular basis with parents who don't get to have that realize the promise of what public education can do. It does bring pain to you. It does, it hurts. And so part of the work, right, is listening to families, hearing their experiences, hearing their hurt first and foremost, because part of the challenge is people aren't seen, they're not heard. Their experiences are erased, like they don't happen. And when we think about the threat to public education, we have to be able to hold both truths, because if we don't, we will have another group coming up later, 20 years, 10 years saying, oh, this public thing isn't working. I never forget, I was on some New York Times podcast as a parent to talk about my experience. And I was with another white parent and a Latinx parent who were from the other side. And they were like, parents right. And I had to push back and say, well, who gets to determine which parents' rights get pushed up? And as a parent who had been working in this, doing this work for many years as not a staff person of an organization, but just because I'm a parent and it impacts me directly and personally, how dare you, right, beat this drum of parent rights that then silences the voices of parents like the ones that I work with, like the ones that Kristen was lifting up. And so the work is really about finding the through line. The work is, if the through line doesn't actually run through your experience, be quiet and listen to the experiences of people who haven't had what they needed in our education system in order for us to transform that system so it can be what we all desire it to be.
Marcus, I have a related question for you. Even at this late date, given all the things we heard from Josh about the record of vouchers, what we know about their history, you still have folks here in North Carolina who are making the argument for vouchers using the case of civil rights. Yeah. And I'm thinking about, there's a very prominent gentleman who runs the group North Carolina Can. Right. And he's, relentless. And I wonder, can you sort of help us think through how to respond to that?
But this morning I got up at 4:00 and flew in from Baltimore, Maryland, and happened to, now that you asked this question, depart from Thurgood Marshall Airport. And now it's full circle just, 4 hours, 5 hours later, because in a very real way, he would be turning over in his resting place if he saw the perversion of his work being used to funnel money away from public schools. Individuals that say that really don't have an understanding of why the civil rights movement started, the current Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks nonviolent era of the civil rights movement, because civil rights movement has happened well before the 50s and 60s. We have to start telling that story in a very real way. There were car porters that were working in trains. There were individuals that were fighting wars and were coming back 20, 30 years before the March on Washington, talking about equal treatment. And education had always been one of those areas. When we think about school busing and we think about the desegregation effort that has taken place across the country, in a very real way, individuals that are just now coming into this conversation with vouchers as a civil rights mechanism are actually corrupting the notion of what the intentionality of investing or challenging the United States government to include black students in public schools and public education. One of the things that I used to do in NCAE was talk about the reality that at one point in time, you had a system in North Carolina that called one set of schools normal, and the other set of schools, what were they? Not normal, I guess, and normal. They were colored. But what does that say in a very real way? And so that understanding of that psyche, and I think the North Carolina is ripe for this type of work, and this question is so intentional here in North Carolina because in the earlier part of reframing the Constitution right after emancipation, the majority of North Carolina was uneducated. Ann McCall tells us very well. She's an active attorney, former NCAA general counsel. She will tell the story that it was intentional by design that North Carolina invested in good roads, invested in good schools. And in a very real way, when African Americans and people on the margins see that investment, they know that public good, because it comes from our tax dollars, should go into our public schools because our students are going to get served there. And so I hate to hear this conversation about individual, because it's not about choice, right? You can choose to send your child wherever you want to go. What you can't choose is what to do with public dollars. And so I think the individuals that are making that claim are really just baseless in general. And I wanted to take just 1 second. I was looking for a picture, and I have it. I may see if we can put it on the board. Many of us, Kristen Beller in the background, I see Kristen, flanked Letha in 2022. When we talk about the hostile environment that our school board was in, Letha stepped in the middle of that in a very real way. And I think so living it from the standpoint of being on this panel and you all hearing it, you don't realize how dedicated Letha has been to this work. For someone to come out and attack her personally, and for us to rally behind Letha. Before there was this opportunity to have public schools strong, we demonstrated that. And I would say that that was the nucleus for the support that we have to do in every single district across the state. So Letha, I just wanted to publicly hear thank you, because you have invested the time. And I'm glad to see things shifting in the direction of where you can see the benefit, because a lot of our leaders in the civil rights movement didn't get a chance to see the maturation of their movement. They didn't get to walk into integrated spaces. They didn't get to learn in integrated settings. Letha is going to be able to see the benefit of her work because of everybody on this row. And I think that's a very beautiful thing. And because of the work that you're doing in your book, Jennifer, for elevating that as well.
Well, Letha, the other panelists have agreed to cede their time so that we can just talk about how great you are. So let's start. Let's start with your glasses. How much? When do you want to start questions?
11:47.
Okay. Okay, that sounds great. So Todd, I'm so struck listening to you and Letha talk about the kind of coalition that you are trying to build. And you very intentionally talk about class in a way that I don't think we typically hear people talk about when they're describing public education advocacy. And so I want you to just kind of walk us through where you see this work ultimately leading.
One of the things that we find when we go to talk to people about public schools is that if we talk about the broader narrative, like kind of like the Fox Newsification of it all, that narrative is out there. That this idea that public schools are failing, but when you go talk to people about their kids' public school, it's a very different story. And we actually think that that's the key, is talking to people about their child's public school, their neighborhood school, their alma mater. Stu mentioned the football games on Friday night. Like, if you were in Greensboro, if you were a Dudley Panther, you were a Dudley Panther for life. And that identity goes deeply throughout the community. So when we go talk to people about, do you want more money for for schools, like they know that teachers should get paid more. They know that kind of broad strokes. But when you talk to them about Dudley High School and that football team, or the fact that their kid is sitting in a class and didn't have an AP teacher this year because there's a long-term sub because there's a teacher shortage, people are deeply invested in that. And when they have frustrations about their public school, they have frustrations because public schools are not able to offer and fulfill their promise. They want more of the promise of public schools, not less. You know, they're not concerned about what's in the library. They're not concerned about who's in the bathroom. And they're not concerned about these things, but they are concerned about, does my kid have a updated textbook? Is there access to technology? Am I going to be able to send my kid to a good public university? These are the things that keep parents up at night. Can I get my kid into I love our choice programs inside our public schools, but I hate that our children have to our parents have to decide, can I get my kid into the dual language program, the one dual language program in Greensboro? You know, that is what people want, and their frustrations are rooted more in, is there a bus driver? Because we don't pay bus drivers a living wage in North Carolina. So I really think in terms of if we go talk to people, we are on the side of what people want. And they have to understand that we're on what Governor Cooper was talking about is we are in a different phase. We are on the cusp of losing some core essential services that when people don't have them, they are understandably frustrated, and we have to understand and hear that frustration. And this fight for resources over the years, you know, those of us that have been in the fight for ed justice, we'll talk about race equity or gender equity. You cannot do any of that without the fight for resources. And I want our folks to start saying, good quality public education for every kid does cost money. Yes. That's why the other side is heavily investing a lot of money to make sure that doesn't happen, because we also know that when we do invest, we are that rising tide that lifts all boats that Letha is talking about, is that it works. Yes. And the last thing that I'll say is, coming through the pandemic, schools are so much more than just academics. At a time when this nation stopped on a dime, the people that were paid the least were the ones that made sure our kids got fed.
That's right.
They were the ones that were out there before there were masks. They were out there making sure that putting together packets so the kids could learn at home. And as tough as that time period was, our public schools showed up in a time of crisis, just like they do during hurricanes, the flooding that they're still recovering from down east just last week. Time and time again, these institutions show up, and our folks know it. But we have to make sure that the rallying cry is there to know that it is not as simple as this misnomer of school choice. It's not a choice. It is an either or. Okay, and we're at the cusp of having to decide which way we're going to go in North Carolina.
Shanique, you were nodding along as Todd was describing how so often the disappointment of parents is a response to the fact that the promise of public education hasn't been realized. And one thing that's really kind of amazing is how when you get parents together across lines of difference, including political differences, what a similar vision they have for what they want for their own kids. And I'm curious about how you are, do you come across this in your own work?
Yes, and I love my Wake County public school friends before I say this. So even in Wake County, public school system, 199 schools, and we have PTAs that have $200,000 plus budgets, and then we have some PTAs that are not even in the school buildings. And what my vision, I have a dream, right? I'm going to do Dr. Martin Luther King. I have a dream that one day our PTAs of influence, affluence fiscally and with all of the social capital and networks that they have, reach out to our PTAs and see that there's a need there and respond to the need. I think that we are at a critical time, like Todd said, that we have to demand that something changes. And I believe that that change can start by our parent groups like PTAs mobilizing and supporting each other across school buildings, across school districts, across counties. Because the voice of the parent, the pen of the parent, the vote of the parent is so pivotal. And I don't know if we truly know the power and influence that we have with those mechanisms.
Letha, we've saved the last question for you. You have been involved in this work now, we heard, for a decade, and you've been on the front lines. You've been through some stuff. There are people in this room who've been doing it for even longer. Renee in the front row is exhausted. So I'm just wondering if you could just tell us how you keep going, but also give folks some encouragement, because after a week like you've just been through, it is hard to spring out of bed and think, here we go.
Excellent question. So first and foremost, y'all, I'm a person of deep faith. My religion is Islam. I'm a Muslim, and that my relationship with God permeates all that I do. So the incident that Marcus referenced that happened to me in 2022 at the school board, I remember, being put out after being attacked and responding, and sitting in my car, and Monica sent me a text and said, "Letha, I'm sorry that happened to you." And I remember I was crying, because I told you earlier, Chris, I'm a crier from way back when. But the question that came up for me was, why did that just happen to me? God, why did you put me through this thing? And the resounding response I got back was, why not you? Because I had been doing this work, and I'm a rabble-rouser at heart. If you know me, you know that I stand firmly for justice and truth and for people. And so I said, it was supposed to happen to me. And Todd and I talked the next morning, and we said, we're going to use this. So this is an opportunity. So yeah, it happened to me, but it happened to the right person, because it created an opportunity to rally other people to show up at Wake County School Board, to speak up, not just in support of me, but in support of all families. And when I think about the hope that permeates what I do, I think and believe wholeheartedly, like others before me and who are with me now, that the people together are stronger. And so I cannot allow what appears to be defeats to stop me from working to realize the world that I want my grandson, who turns 3 tomorrow, Yasir, to experience as he grows in this world and enters public school. And so my rallying cry to anybody that I talk to, that there are more of us who believe in the good that we all deserve. And if we join forces, we will defeat those who want to have us have a different experience in this country and in the world.
Can we just get a quick round of applause for our amazing panelists? So we're gonna hand it over to you in the audience, and the panelists have assured me that no questions are off limits. Probing personal questions, ask away.
Hello, my name is Jen Shorter. I am a proud member of the NCPTA, and I am the president of the PTA at the Mills Park Elementary School in Cary. Thank you. I read your book this week, Jennifer, and I loved it. I loved the idea of us crossing the bridge. More people want and care about public schools than don't. And we need to make sure people realize that's a small minority that's trying to kind of tear down the public schools. Something has happened at our school, and I see a real opportunity to start this discussion. And I wanted to ask, because for me, it's the facts, right? It's the data that's out there, and I put A and B and C together, but your book was saying maybe not hit people with statistics. So anybody on the panel, what's gonna be my most effective way of starting this conversation? What's really gonna speak to people?
Todd mentioned this earlier, and I think it could be a good exercise at the school. When we are talking about impact, start with your personal why of why you're engaged. And then with the PTA or with the parents, you could have one session for parents that connects the dots specifically to why they're invested, and then use that as a galvanizing force in that building to organize. When we're thinking about, the situation that probably happened at the school and the ramifications of that and the impact it has on students or teachers or the parents, that's a conversation piece. And I think oftentimes we don't have to jump to the solution right away. We have to make sure people have built that base of understanding of why this is impactful, why this is harmful, because so much stuff happens. This week alone in the news, we've seen enough to last us a lifetime. And our attention span is off when we're just, kind of flyers are out here, social media's out here, but your story and connecting the dots and helping people unpack that and what that means and connect that to some type of what we call a theory of change, as other people share their story, that would be the first, just to kind of quick give my response. I know there's probably other responses here too. Yeah.
Hello, I'm Adrienne Wood. I'm from Chowan County, which is very rural. We have one elementary, one middle, one high school. And it's less of a question, but more of a thought that I just think was so amazing that all 5 of you really pushed out there, which is bringing everybody to the table. And so I have 4 children. I have 2 in boarding school, the elite private school. I have 1 in public school and then 1 at NC State. And so oftentimes as an advocate, and I'm a content creator, I get this pushback of, your kids are in boarding school. And I think we have to stop the conversation and bring in people whose children are in private school and maybe they've never been to public school, because they will say to you in rural North Carolina, we want rural North Carolina to thrive, whether we're a realtor or a physician or we own the movie theater. And so we've got to make sure that we are utilizing, to me, those people that oftentimes I think feel like I'm not allowed to talk. And if I wasn't allowed to talk, or that would mean people without children couldn't advocate for public school. I say, well, I've had children in public school for 34 years collectively, so that's a lot more than a lot of people. So anyway, I really like that, and I would love to help you bring public schools first to 30 other counties. So thank you.
I'm David Rockefeller. I spent 32 short, meaningful years in public education in North Carolina, loved my profession. I've been advocating ever since I retired years ago. So it's been a great ride. I love what these people are doing. I think we ought to thank Public School First for Jennifer, thanks for your book. It's just great. I'm thoroughly enjoying it. My question is maybe a bigger picture. I'm a political junkie, and I confess to that. And I confess to being focused a lot on big national races, top of the ticket, and I'm spending way too much time on that. I'm trying to find the best way to get my friends and colleagues, many of whom are retired public educators themselves or are current public educators, to understand what the issues are at the state and local level that truly affect them. And so any advice you can give me to help rattle their cages and help them understand that in just over a month, they got to be voting for themselves and for their communities. Thanks.
I think there's a lot of different ways to go at that. But earlier when Governor Cooper was here, he mentioned the county commissioners. And one of the things that I think is really interesting that we've seen in the fight for full funding for public schools is as the state has moved away from fully funding public schools at the state level, we've relied more and more on counties. And in a county like here in Wake County and Mecklenburg, there is a tax base where there is ground to be gained. In a lot of our rural counties, the tax base is just not there. And so county commissioners should be very concerned when they have constituents coming to them, like with what happened in Alamance County last year, where after decades of underfunding, finally the infrastructure crisis hit and schools were closed for over 2 weeks. All schools were closed due to black mold in the schools. And it was a $17 million cleanup. We ran a campaign the next following year, Public School Strong, in the local Down Home chapter there. And in a very red county, all 5 Republican county commissioners, they raised the property tax 8.6%, which generates another $9.5 million for schools every year now going forward. And that money is going directly to the local public schools. Those commissioners should be furious with the legislators in Raleigh for putting them in that position, right? And that part of it is we at the local level, I think we need to help connect those dots. And when we go to the public meetings, when we go to the school boards and the county commissioners, and they tell us, well, that's a state problem, it's like, well, you need to talk to your friends in the state then, because I don't have their number, but you do. You know, and making sure that we're really sending that message all the way back up to the legislature where it has really, failed our schools and failed our students. And thank you for your service for 32 years. Amazing.
I would also add that there are resources out here, David. Public Schools First has excellent resources about the impact on vouchers and all the public education issues on our real lived experience. Every Child NC has excellent resources on their website. Follow our new plug, shameless plug, Education Justice Action, our new C4 that we launched in particular to protect public education in the state. So I would connect your folks to these resources that exist in the world that help paint the picture of what's at stake if we don't elect pro-public education candidates in the state.
Hello. Oh, crap. You all are organizers, right? One of the problems that I've faced myself is the inaccessibility of so many of these systems. When my family was in crisis, there was absolutely no way I was going to get to a school board meeting at 5:30, let alone where the heart of the matter is at 3 p.m. when they're doing their work session. So how does an everyday advocate work within a system that is often inaccessible to so many of us?
Yeah, you have to find your people first and foremost, Susan, and it can't be from an individual base. So there are folks out there. One of the things as an organization that we do, because we recognize our families find our public education system inaccessible. So we create space to make it accessible. One, we break down what the public school is for, the history of public schools, how they can understand the policies that are created, and then create space for them to dream of new policies. And then we help bring them to school board meetings. We provide childcare so they don't have to worry about where their children are gonna be. We provide meals. So join them with grassroots on the ground folks so that you don't have to do it alone. Create your own community, so that you support each other. Oh, maybe one mama is the babysitter tonight, so the rest of us can show up at the school board meeting or at the General Assembly, or somebody's on carpool to pick up the kids. It's like we have to think from a collective mindset and think about how we erase the barriers that are real and oftentimes intentional barriers to keep those of us who should be engaged in a way that actually can transform the system.
The last question. Thank you.
Hey, it's really not a question. Piggybacking off of Todd here, I haven't heard the word Leandro mentioned today, and that is something, I'm known as the Leandro woman in Franklin County. When the county commissioners see me coming, they're like, oh God, here she comes. And I'm like, hi. $22.2 million would take the pressure off of your back if we got Leandro. And we started, because we're just in a fight with our guy. I mean, it's a hostile. And Down Home is doing amazing work in Franklin County, by the way, Todd, so I hope you know that. But we started going to businesses, and somebody back here mentioned businesses earlier. That started turning the tide. So I think we might have a chance in Franklin County now, because people are starting to go, hold up, why is my money having to pay for this when the state is supposed to be paying for it? And that's getting the attention of everybody. And so if you're not doing that in your county, please do that and learn about Leandro and just keep hammering them with Leandro. Because I'm trying to get the commissioners to put pressure on Matthew Winslow and Lisa Barnes, who are our representatives. Yes, good Lord, the state Supreme Court. That is starting to get the attention of our not so blue commissioners, is the Leandro funding and taking the pressure off of them to fund our schools. So that was just all I have to say.
One thing I'll add there too, if you go to Public Schools First may have this tool also, but on the Every Child site, you can click on your county and it will show you how much money has been diverted from your county. Out of that $3.3 billion, how much goes into each and every single county, you can print that out. And especially for folks that are in the business community, when you talk about that dollar investment and how much money is being diverted, that is a very clear signal. And also, you can match how much dollar for dollar as they are not spending that money in school. You can see how that money is being funneled to those other programs. So Every Child NC's website, I think it's everychildnc.org. And you can click on that toolkit, pull down that information, and you can host a party. You know, everybody will show up here. We'll love to come, especially if you got those good meatballs.